Welcome to Reformed Thinking and welcome to the Deep Dive.
It's good to be here.
So we've got a fascinating set of sources today, all provided by a listener. And it really gets at a timeless tension.
Which one is that?
The ethical claims of Christianity on one side, and then on the other, the psychological insights of the modern age.
Right. It's a conversation that's been happening for over a century now.
Exactly. And to guide us, we're taking a really close look at some excerpts from C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity.
Specifically, the chapter he wrote on morality and psychoanalysis. It's a really packed few pages.
It really is. And the listener who sent this in, they're looking for clarity on a very practical, real-world issue. I think a lot of us feel this.
Which is what?
Well, if Christian teaching gives us a method for, personal integrity, for living a good life.
A technique for putting the human machine right, as Lewis would say.
Yes, exactly that. And then modern psychology comes along and offers another technique for fixing human behavior. Where do these two powerful systems, where do they align? And maybe more importantly, where do they conflict?
That's a huge question. And Lewis, I think, gives us a really solid framework for tackling it.
He does. So that's our mission for this deep dive. First, we need to unpack how Lewis separates the philosophical baggage that came with psychoanalysis from the actual technique itself.
The amateur philosophizing versus the specialist's work.
Right. And then second, we have to get a firm grip on his main argument about human accountability. What is it that God actually judges?
And for Lewis, it's not the psychological raw material we're handed at birth or through trauma.
No. It's the free choices we make with that material, and we really need to dissect that distinction fully. Okay, let's unpack this.
So where does Lewis even begin? He actually sets the stage by reminding us what we're trying to build in the first place.
Right, the goal of a Christian society.
Yes, and he starts with the premise that's...
Well, it's just very sensible.
Yeah.
He says you cannot achieve a truly Christian society without first having Christian individuals.
It seems obvious when you say it, but it's something we can easily forget. We look at systemic problems and want systemic solutions, but Lewis pulls it back to the individual person.
He does. It frames the whole discussion. It's about individual responsibility, but as a necessary component for the health of the larger community.
And he's quick to point out that you can't just wait around. You can't say, okay, once everyone is individually good, then we'll fix society.
No, he says you have to be tackling both problems at the same time, concurrently.
That's a trap we fall into, I think. We think one has to come before the other.
Right. We either focus only on personal holiness and ignore social justice, or we focus only on social justice and forget that the people implementing it need to be transformed themselves.
Yeah.
Lewis says, no, it's two jobs happening at once.
So what are these two jobs exactly? Well, the first job he describes is external. It's social. It's the work of figuring out how to apply the fundamental command, the golden rule, do as you would be done by, to our incredibly complex modern life.
And that is not easy at all, is it? It's a huge intellectual and practical task.
It's immense. It's one thing to say, love your neighbor. It's a completely different thing to figure out what that means for, say, international trade policy or setting a minimum wage.
More how to structure a just legal system. These are massive technical questions. It's like the engineering phase of building a moral society.
That's a great way to put it. It's the engineering.
Yeah.
And Lewis knew that this required Christians who were specialists, economists, politicians, sociologists, not just pastors and theologians. They have to do the hard work of mapping that ancient moral standard onto a world that's just completely different.
Okay, so that's the big picture, outward, systematic work, job number one.
Right.
But the success of all that engineering depends entirely on the second job Lewis brings up, the internal one.
Yes, the individual preparation. Because even if you design the most perfect, just society on paper, it would collapse in a day if the people running it were greedy, selfish, and power-hungry.
The system is only as good as the people in it.
Exactly. So the second task is becoming the kind of person who would genuinely want to apply the golden rule. Not just because it's a rule, but because their heart desires it. It's the conditioning of the soul.
And when we talk about that from a Reformed perspective, what we're really talking about is sanctification, right?
That's the theological term for it, yes.
Wow.
It's the ongoing work of the Holy Spirit to conform us to the image of Christ.
It's not just gritting your teeth and following rules. It's a slow, day-by-day process of your desires and affections actually being changed, being reoriented toward God.
So that you start to naturally incline toward things like kindness and honesty, instead of always having to fight this internal battle against selfishness.
Right. So Lewis starts there because he wants to move from the big social picture down to the individual. He says he wants to consider the Christian specification for the human machine.
I love that phrase. It's so practical. Like, what are the design specs for a person who is functioning as intended?
Yeah, and what does a morally healthy, fully capable person actually look like? This brings that huge societal goal right back down to my choices, my thoughts, my personal habits today.
It does. But, as soon as you start talking about fixing the human machine in the 20th century, a certain name immediately comes to mind.
Sigmund Freud, of course.
Psychoanalysis.
Correct.
It's the other great system that claims to have a technique for healing the mind and soul. So it's very natural for the listener to see these two, Christianity and psychoanalysis, as direct competitors.
Two different repair manuals for the same broken machine.
Exactly. And this is where Lewis gives us his first really crucial clarifying distinction. He says if you're going to even think about psychoanalysis, you have to be very careful to separate two different things.
And if you mix them up.
You'll end up in one of two errors. You'll either reject something that could be genuinely useful, or you'll accidentally swallow something that's, well, spiritually poisonous.
Okay, so what are the two things we need to separate?
The first thing is the general philosophical worldview that Freud and some of his followers attached to their medical theories.
This wasn't just medicine then, it was a whole philosophy of life.
A whole philosophy, a sweeping materialist view of the world. It tried to explain everything, the origin of humanity, the nature of reality, and very importantly, it assumed that there was no such thing as the spiritual or the transcendent.
And Lewis is pretty blunt about this part, as I recall.
He's very blunt. He says this specific philosophical view is in direct conflict with Christianity. There's no middle ground.
Because if you accept Freud's philosophy, things like morality and religion are just, byproducts of subconscious drives.
Right, they're just illusions created by our brain chemistry or our repressed sexual urges or our childhood experiences. In that worldview, there's no need for a transcendent God who gives moral laws, and there's certainly no concept of sin in the Christian sense.
Okay, so that's the first thing. The philosophical baggage, Lewis says, set that aside, it's incompatible. What's the second thing?
The second thing is the actual medical technique of psychoanalysis itself. The method for diagnosing and treating psychological problems, completely separate from all that philosophical stuff.
And what's his verdict on that?
He says that the technique itself is not in the least contradictory to Christianity.
That's a really important move he's making. He's saying a person's worldview doesn't automatically invalidate their scientific or medical work.
Precisely. A non-Christian doctor can still set a broken bone correctly. A non-Christian psychologist might still have real insights into how the human psyche gets damaged and how it can be, to some extent, repaired. The therapeutic method can work, even if the therapist's ultimate explanation for why it works is wrong.
But some people would push back on that, wouldn't they? They'd say, you can't just separate the technique from the philosophy it grew out of. How does Lewis justify making that clean break?
He justifies it with a really smart distinction between the specialist and the amateur.
Okay, explain that.
He says, look, when Freud is talking about how to diagnose and cure neuroses, he's speaking as a specialist. He's an expert in his defined field. You should listen to him with respect, as you would any expert.
But
the moment Freud steps outside his clinic and starts making grand pronouncements about the origin of the universe or the meaning of life, he's no longer a specialist.
he become an amateur philosopher.
Exactly. And Lewis argues we are under no obligation at all to give the same weight to the opinions of an amateur as we do to the work of the specialist, even if it's the same person.
That makes a lot of sense. You listen to a brilliant heart surgeon when they talk about surgery, but you don't necessarily take their advice on how to fix your car's transmission.
Right. And Lewis actually gives a personal example to back this up, to show he's not just making this up to protect his theology.
What was that?
He mentions that as a scholar of languages and literature, he'd read some of Freud's writings on those subjects. And he says he found Freud to be very ignorant when he spoke outside his own field.
That's a key detail. It's not just a theoretical argument for him. He's seen evidence of it himself. Expertise is specific to a domain.
It is. And it strengthens his case that we can respect Freud for his clinical work while being highly skeptical of his amateur philosophy.
He even brings up Carl Jung, right?
He does. He points out that Freud's general philosophy wasn't just in conflict with Christianity, it was in direct conflict with the views of the other great psychologist, Jung.
So even within the field of psychology, there was no agreement on the big philosophical questions.
Not at all, which gives us as Christians the freedom to say, okay, the technique might be helpful, but the worldview attached to it is just one of several options, and it's one we reject.
So if the technique itself is valid or can be, where does it overlap with Christian morality and where does it differ? Lewis says they're doing rather different things.
Yes, this gets us to the absolute core of his argument. To understand the difference, he first breaks down what goes into any moral choice we make. He says anytime you make a decision, from choosing what to eat for breakfast to deciding whether to forgive someone, there are two essential parts involved.
And the first part is?
The first part is what he calls the act of choosing. This is the decision itself, the exercise of your free will, the moment you say, I will do this and not that.
That's the part where morality really lives, according to Lewis.
That's where it lives and breathes. It's the central volitional act.
Okay, so you have the choice. What's the second part?
The second part is the raw material. This is all the psychological stuff that's presented to the chooser before the choice is made.
So my feelings, my impulses, my desires, all the internal weather happening inside me.
Exactly, your whole psychological outfit. And the key thing is, you don't choose this raw material. It's just there. It's what you have to work with.
And Lewis then divides that raw material into two types, right?
He does. First, he says, there are the normal feelings or impulses. These are just part of the standard human package. Like the natural fear you feel when you're in a dangerous situation. Or the natural desire a man might feel for a woman. These are, built-in features. They might be strong or inconvenient, but they're not signs of a malfunction.
They're part of the original design, so to speak.
Right. But then there's the second category. The abnormal or unnatural feelings.
And these are the malfunctions.
These are malfunctions. They're the result of something having gone wrong in the subconscious. They're distortions of our nature.
Give me an example.
An irrational pathological fear of something harmless, like cats or spiders, or, as Lewis mentions, perverted or disordered desires. These aren't part of the standard design. They're symptoms of a disease or damage.
Okay, so we have the act of choosing, and then we have the raw material, which can be either normal or abnormal. How does this help us separate morality from psychoanalysis?
It allows him to draw a very clean line. He says the job of psychoanalysis is concerned only with the raw material.
So its job is to fix the malfunctions.
Yes, to remove the abnormal feelings, to take the person with a pathological fear of cats and, through therapy, reduce that fear back to a normal, manageable level. It undertakes, as Lewis puts it, to provide the person with better raw material for his acts of choice.
It's a form of healing. It's treating a disease in the psyche.
That's all it is. It's corrective maintenance on the machine's wiring.
Then what is morality's job?
Morality's job is concerned only with the other part, the acts of choice themselves.
So morality doesn't care what you feel, it cares what you do with that feeling.
That's it, in a nutshell. Morality doesn't judge you for having a flash of anger or a selfish impulse or a moment of fear. It judges the choice you make in response to that impulse. The state of your soul is determined by your will, not your feelings.
This is a huge deal. It means that from a Christian perspective, you are not held morally accountable for the psychological hand you were dealt.
No. You are only held accountable for how you choose to play that hand.
And to make this distinction absolutely crystal clear, he gives that famous illustration.
The three men going to war. It's brilliant because it makes this abstract idea completely concrete. It shows you exactly where the psychological problem ends and the moral problem begins.
So he sets the scene on a battlefield, maximum pressure, fear is a given. And we start with man one. He's our control group, our baseline.
Right. Man one has the ordinary, natural fear of danger. It's the normal raw material. It's unpleasant, it's difficult, but it's manageable.
Now what does he do?
He subdues it by moral effort. Through an act of his will, he chooses to do his duty despite the fear. And in doing so, he becomes a brave man.
So his struggle is purely a moral one. His psychological machine is working as designed. He just has to use his willpower to steer it in the right direction.
Exactly. That's the moral life operating on standard equipment.
But then we get to men 2 and 3, and their situation is totally different.
Totally different. They don't just have normal fear. They have exaggerated, irrational fears. Panic attacks, maybe. What we might today call PTSD.
It's the abnormal raw material, the malfunction.
Yes. And Lewis makes a crucial point here. He says their fear is so overwhelming that no amount of moral effort can do anything about it.
That's so important for anyone listening who struggles with severe anxiety or depression. Lewis is validating that experience of being psychologically overwhelmed.
He is. He's saying that when the raw material is that damaged, the will can't operate properly. The machine is broken. It's a disease, not a character flaw.
Okay, so what happens to these two men?
A psychoanalyst intervenes. The analyst treats them, cures them of their subconscious issues. The irrational, crippling fear is gone. Now they just have the normal, manageable fear that man one started with.
So psychologically, they are now on a level playing field with man one. The therapy is done, the clinical work is complete.
And this is the pivot point of the whole story.
Oh, right.
Lewis says, okay, the psychological problem is over. The moral problem starts right now.
Because the therapist fixed the engine, but now the driver has to choose where to go.
Perfect analogy.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they now have identical psychological material, their choices reveal two completely different moral characters.
Let's look at man two. How does he respond to being cured?
His response is one of gratitude and duty. He says something like, thank goodness I've got rid of that awful problem. Now at last I can do what I always wanted to do, my duty.
So his will was always pointed in the right direction, but his psychological condition, his disease, was preventing him from acting on it?
Correct. The moment his machine was fixed, he immediately drove it toward a selfless moral goal.
But man three, he's a different story.
A very different story. He's also relieved to be cured, but his reaction is entirely self-serving. He says, basically, I'm glad I'm not terrified anymore, but that doesn't change anything. I'm still just going to look out for myself and let the other guy take the risks.
Wow. So the cure didn't make him a better person?
Not at all. It just made him a more effective coward,
No.
a less anxious, selfish person. His moral direction was always selfish, and the cure just gave him a healthier vehicle to pursue that selfishness.
The contrast is chilling. The difference between them after the cure has nothing to do with psychology. It is purely moral.
Purely moral. Psychoanalysis could fix the fear, but it couldn't touch the intention. It couldn't change the heart.
And that leads to Lewis's big conclusion from the story.
It does. He says no matter how much you improve a man's raw material, you are still left with something else. The real free choice of the man, either to put his own advantage first or to put it last.
And he says that choice is the only thing morality is concerned with.
The only thing. The material is the stage, but the choice is the play that unfolds on it.
This then leads him to make that critical distinction for anyone wrestling with guilt over mental health. The distinction between a disease and a sin.
Yes, the bad psychological material, the irrational fear, the deep-seated anxiety, that is not a sin, but a disease.
That must be such a freeing statement for people to hear.
It's massive, because
Yeah.
a disease requires curing. It requires treatment, medicine, therapy, and compassion. It doesn't require repenting of. You can't repent of having a chemical imbalance or a trauma response.
But a sin is different. A sin is a choice.
A sin is a voluntary act of the will, turning away from God. And that requires repentance. The distinction is everything. You're responsible for how you manage your depression, but you are not sinful simply for having depression.
Okay, so if God is only judging the choice, not the raw material, that completely changes how we should think about his judgment.
It changes everything. It means his standards are totally different from ours. We, human beings, we judge by external actions. We see what someone does or fails to do.
We judge the results.
We judge the results. But God judges the internal moral choice. Specifically, he measures the amount of effort it took to make that choice, given the quality of the raw material.
Which means, as Lewis says, the final accounting is going to be full of surprises.
Full of surprises. What looks heroic to us might be fairly minor in God's eyes, and what looks like a tiny, pathetic effort to us might be a monumental victory in heaven.
He gives that great example of the neurotic man and the cat.
It's a fantastic illustration. He says, imagine a man with a true pathological horror of cats. A real phobia. It's a disease. But for some good reason, to save the cat maybe, or to comfort a crying child, this man forces himself through an incredible amount of internal struggle and willpower to reach out and pick up the cat.
To us, that looks like a small act. He picked up a kitten. Big deal.
Right. But Lewis suggests that in God's eyes, that single act might be a greater display of courage than a perfectly healthy soldier winning the Victoria Cross.
Wow, how can that be?
Because the soldier had to overcome normal, manageable fear. The neurotic man had to overcome a pathological, overwhelming fear. God doesn't just see the action. He sees the internal resistance that was overcome to perform the action. He measures the effort of the will.
He has a second example that's just as challenging, the one about the perverted man.
Yes. He says to imagine someone who was raised in a terrible environment, taught from childhood that cruelty is good and kindness is weakness. His entire psychological raw material is warped.
His moral compass is completely broken.
Completely. And then one day, this man performs one tiny little kindness, or he refrains from a cruel act that he could have easily gotten away with.
Yeah.
Maybe he even gets mocked by his peers for being soft.
That little act, which we might not even notice, could be massive in God's sight.
It could be greater, Lewis says, than one of us,
Yeah.
with our good upbringing and stable temperament, giving up our life for a friend.
Because we had a huge head start. For us, self-sacrifice might feel like the natural right thing to do. For him, that tiny act of kindness was like forging a new universe of morality inside himself.
It required a colossal expenditure of moral energy just to take that one small step in the right direction.
Realizing this about God's internal standard, it has a very direct, practical consequence for us, doesn't it?
It leads straight to the command not to judge other people.
Because we simply can't. We don't have the data.
We don't have the data. Lewis says we only ever see the final product, the external action that results from a person's choice working on their raw material. We have no idea what that raw material was actually like.
We can't know if they were saddled with terrible heredity that made them prone to addiction, or if they had an abusive childhood that destroyed their ability to trust.
We can't know. We don't see the internal struggle. So when we judge their external actions, we're often just judging their disease or their trauma or their bad luck. We aren't judging the actual moral person at all.
And Lewis turns this right back on us, which is where it gets uncomfortable.
It gets very uncomfortable. He says that we, who might seem like quite nice people, we might have been blessed with such good raw material, a calm temperament, a stable upbringing, good health.
That our external niceness is actually no great moral achievement at all.
It might just be an accident of our constitution. And we may have made such little use of those advantages that, in God's eyes, we're actually worse than those whom we regard as fiends.
Because more was given to us and more was expected, our failure to use our good material to its fullest is a greater moral failing.
It's a very sobering thought. And it sets us up for his description of what happens at death, what he calls the final unveiling.
This is a powerful image. He says that so much of our psychological makeup, our personality, our moods, our anxieties, is tied to our physical bodies.
So when the body dies, all of that just falls away. And what's left standing naked before God is the real central man, the thing that chose.
Just the will. The accumulated identity forged by a lifetime of choices.
That's all that's left. He says it's a great stripping away. The nice things we took credit for, that were really just due to our good digestion or easy circumstances,
Yeah.
they'll fall off.
And on the other hand, the nasty things that plagued other people, their short temper that was really due to chronic pain or their anxiety that was a chemical imbalance, that will fall off them.
And for the very first time, everyone will be seen for what they truly are, just the core of their moral self. And as Lewis famously says,
There will be surprises.
there will be surprises.
This whole vision moves Christian morality away from being some kind of simple transaction, like follow these rules and I'll give you a reward.
It's so much more dynamic than that. He uses this metaphor of self-creation. It's not a bargain, it's a process.
What does he mean by that?
He says that every single choice you make, no matter how small, turns that central part of you into something slightly different than it was a moment before.
So life is this slow, continuous process of shaping our inner self.
A lifetime of choices. You're taking the raw material you've been given, and through your will, you are sculpting your own soul, moment by moment.
And he says there are only two possible final products, two kinds of creatures we're all becoming.
Only two. The first possibility is what he calls the heavenly creature.
And what defines that creature?
Harmony. It's being that is in harmony with God, with other creatures, and crucially, in harmony with itself. It's whole, it's integrated.
And the result of that harmony is joy, peace, knowledge.
Competence. It's a state of flourishing. The will is aligned with reality and goodness. It's what we were made for.
But then there's the other option, the terrifying one.
The hellish creature. And this being is defined by the opposite of harmony, a state of constant war and hatred.
War with God, war with others.
And war with itself, which is maybe the most horrifying part. It's a state of total disintegration.
The results he lists are just chilling. Madness, horror, rage, impotence, eternal loneliness.
It's the logical endpoint of a self that has consistently chosen itself over everything else.
Yeah.
It ends up completely alone and at war with its own existence. And Lewis's point is that we are never standing still.
Right. Each of us at each moment is progressing to the one state or the other. There's no neutral ground.
Every choice is a step.
And thinking about this shaping process helps to explain something that can seem very strange about Christian ethics.
What's that?
Why Christian writers can seem so incredibly strict about something like a mere sin of thought, a flash of lust, or a moment of private anger.
And yet seem so quick to talk about forgiveness for huge public sins like murder or betrayal.
Exactly. It seems like a paradox because we're always focused on the external damage. My angry thought didn't hurt anyone, so how can it be a big deal?
But Lewis says Christian writers aren't focused on the external damage. They're always focused on the inner mark.
The mark that action leaves on that tiny central self, which no one sees in this life, but which each of us will have to endure or enjoy forever.
Right. The external result is secondary to the internal damage to the soul-shaping process.
Sure, he gives that example of two men who get angry.
Yes. One man's anger explodes, and it causes actual bloodshed. A terrible, tragic external result.
The other man's anger just leads to him making a nasty comment, and he gets laughed at. The external result is trivial.
The external results are worlds apart. One is a crime, the other is just an awkward social moment. And yet Lewis says the little mark on the soul may be much the same in both.
How can that be?
Because the quality of the moral choice was the same. In that moment, both men allowed their will to be twisted by rage. Both took a step toward becoming that hellish creature.
He's describing the mechanism of how sin works then. Each time you give in to that rage, it does something to you.
It twists that central man. And unless you repent of it, it makes it that much harder to resist the next time, and it makes the rage itself worse when you do fall into it. You're carving a groove of wrath into your own soul.
But the flip side of that is the power of grace.
Exactly. Because the internal mark is what matters, the gospel can operate right at that point. Both the man who caused the bloodshed and the man who just laughed at can have that twist in the central man straightened out again.
If they genuinely turn back to God in repentance.
If they do. The external size of the sin doesn't create a barrier to internal healing.
So in the end, the bigness or smallness of a thing from an outside perspective just isn't what really matters.
It's not. What matters is the direction of the will. Are you moving toward harmony or toward war? Toward heaven or toward hell?
This brings us to his last point, which feels almost like a paradox. The connection between moral clarity and self-knowledge.
It is very counterintuitive. He argues that the right direction, the path of getting morally better, leads not only to peace, but to knowledge. Specifically, a deeper and often more painful knowledge of yourself.
We'd normally think the opposite. We'd think that as you become more saintly, you'd feel better and better about yourself.
Lewis says no, the opposite is true. When a person is genuinely getting better, they actually understand more clearly the evil that is still left inside them.
Their awareness of their own sinfulness increases as their actual sinfulness decreases.
Precisely. And conversely, when a person is getting worse, their moral vision gets darker. They understand their own badness less and less.
They lose the ability to even see their own faults.
Right. They become blind to their own condition. He used a few simple common sense analogies to explain this.
Like the one about sleep.
Yeah. You only understand what the state of sleep is when you're awake. While you're asleep, you don't have the consciousness to analyze it.
Or the one about arithmetic. You can only spot the mistakes in a math problem when your mind is clear and working correctly. While you're in the middle of making a mistake, you think you're right.
It's the same with drunkenness. You understand the foolishness and loss of control of being drunk when you're sober? A sober mind is required to assess a confused mind.
And a morally healthy soul is required to accurately assess a sinful one.
That's his point, which leads to his final, very stark conclusion about human character.
What's that?
He says, good people know about both good and evil. Bad people do not know about either.
That's a powerful statement. The good person has a clear vision of the standard of goodness, so they can see how far they fall short of it. The bad person has lost sight of the standard altogether, so they live in a fog of self-deception.
It's a profound insight into the nature of virtue and vice.
So, wrapping up this whole deep dive, what's the core framework Lewis has given us?
I think it's that clean, critical distinction. Psychoanalysis, at its best, is there to address the raw material. It treats the disease. It requires our compassion and our clinical attention.
But morality is about something else entirely. It addresses the central choice. It deals with sin, which requires repentance and a redirection of the will.
We have to remember that God's judgment isn't like ours. It's an internal measure. He's judging the quality of our will, the effort we put forth, with the specific hand we were dealt, not just the glossy external result.
It's this constant moment-by-moment process of shaping our inner self.
It is. Lewis's work really forces us to look inward, not just outward. We are actively building ourselves into one of two things, one of two eternal creatures.
So if every choice we make is really that significant, maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to reflect on. Lewis reminds us that all our choices are shaping us. If every small decision contributes to the nature of that real central man, then what choice did you make today? Something small, something private, something you thought didn't matter. Maybe a subtle indulgence in bitterness or a quiet act of forgiveness when no one was watching. Which of those small choices contributed to the creation of the creature you are becoming? Something to think about long after this discussion is over.